Bing, bing, bong, bing. Bing, bing, bong, bong, bing, bing.
Welcome to the BJ Show. Let's rock and roll. Rock and roll. Come on, everybody. Let's lose control. Brad John never wants to follow. Yeah, ready for the ride. It's the BJ Show. BJ Show.
John, you sure you want to do this morning?
100%, Brad. Why do you ask?
I'm just curious. That is John Combest, Combest, and he runs his website called johncombest.com. Every single day of his life for the past 23 years, we just had an anniversary, but he won't tell me what the date is. Anyway, we know it's sometime in October. He updates his site, which includes links to all sorts of important stories around the state of Missouri. Could be St. Louis, could be Jefferson City, could be Kansas City. It even could be Peculiar, Missouri. We don't even know where Bill Eigel has now registered to vote, or actually registered as candidate. We don't know what he's going to run for in Peculiar, but it will be a peculiar incident when he does run for something in Peculiar. Anyway, John puts this list together, and we start to show off with the top three. We bring this guy in.
I'm Casey Kasem.
And Casey does this.
We're on our way to the number one.
And he does this.
And here they are.
And he does this.
Now on with the countdown.
And then he does this.
In third place.
Picking up on a thread from last week, Brad, we talked about the fact that Washington University let Megan Green go. Megan Green is the president of the St. Louis Board of Aldermen, and she taught a class at the Brown School of Social Work about how to write and pass legislation, how to get things done, the proverbial sausage making. Well, we talked about the fact that Megan would be let go, and the excuse that Washington University used was that the Brown School of Social Work will not employ professors, adjunct professors anymore, who are elected officials. So to me, it seemed like kind of a weaselly excuse to give Megan Green the boot. But good news for Washington University, Brad. WashU has hired a gentleman named Winston Calvert to take over the Megan Green role and teach this class. Now you ask John, who is Winston Calvert? Winston Calvert has had, for political folks, a pretty low profile. He hasn't gone out seeking headlines. He would aide for years to former St. Louis Mayor Francis Slay. He worked for years for St. Louis County Executive Sam Page. And Brad, if his name sounds familiar, we talked about him earlier this year, because he was on the slate of folks that had been part of Governor Parsons' appointments. There was a little tiff between urban politicians and Governor Parson about whether or not those urban politicians had given the stamp of approval to everybody on that list. But Governor Parson appointed Winston Calvert to the Bi-State Board of Directors, which is where Winston Calvert is now. He's an attorney. He used to work at Armstrong Teasdale. Incredibly impressive resume. So this is great news for WashU, Brad. And I would point out one quote in this Joe Holloman piece when Winston was talking to Joe about the difference between himself and Megan Green. Winston said, "Whereas Megan might be more of an idealist, I'm a pragmatist. This is about local government, writing policy, and legislation." In other words, you're not going to get a whole lot of pie-in-the-sky liberal claptrap from Winston Calvert. You're probably going to just get some practical information.
Do you mean he's probably not going to talk about reparations and things like that?
He might not, and I don't think he would probably be setting himself on fire in the name of jihad, if I had to stereotype, Brad.
What's his name again?
Winston Calvert, yeah.
You know, I love those kind of names. There's a guy, you probably know who this is, and I love this name. First time I heard it, I thought to myself, that's not his name. I believe his last name was Castle. You know what I'm talking about? A gentleman from Jefferson City. His first name is Nimrod. You know who I'm talking about?
No, Nimrod Chappelle.
Oh, Nimrod Chappelle. That's where
Yeah. Now, colloquially, he goes by Rod, but I do his family a favor, and his parents, they named him Nimrod. So I cite Rod Chappelle all the time on my website, and I make sure to call him Nimrod. It's the name that his parents gave him.
Well, you know, the interesting thing about that is that, I don't know about you, but in my days, you called someone, like if you want to disparage someone, you called them a Nimrod. You know what I'm saying? But
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you know what the real definition of Nimrod is?
No, does it have something to do with barrel of a gun?
No,
like you're
it's
packing
here,
gunpowder.
Here, let me pick it up again. I'll pull it up again because I looked at this before. It's some like compliment, like in ancient English or something like that. Hold on, let me see if I can find it.
It ended up being a disparaging comment, is what you're saying.
Well, yes, we call it, that guy's a Nimrod. You never use that.
and let me get real specific, and I'll get real geographist here. Folks who went to Hazelwood East would probably remember state championship teams in the 1990s, and Coach Rick Gorzynski would refer to his B team, like the guys who were playing second string. He would call them Nimrod defense. And a lot of kids got their education on what a Nimrod was from Coach Rick Gorzynski.
Do you know he was my coach at Hazelwood?
Are you serious?
Yes.
You never told me that. No way.
Yes, he was my coach at Hazelwood, Coach Gorzynski. Matter of fact, I think.
But what did he coach? What did he coach you?
No, he was a gym teacher.
Oh, the gym teacher. I see.
Yeah,
okay. But I'm sure he coached football back then. He was probably an assistant, and then he went on to coach at East for decades.
Can't remember that, tell you the truth, because of the fact, if I'm not mistaken, when I had him, I think he was like first or second year out of college. He was a young guy.
Yeah, well, that would have been the 40s when you were in high school, right?
It's a long time ago. Yeah, Gorzynski, Rich Gorzynski. Okay,
we're getting off track on Nimrod here, but let me point out one thing too, and I would just point this out for folks who it might seem that choosing a white man, like a white man in his 40s, would be a strange selection for Washington University. I would point out that Winston is uniquely qualified for this. If you think about, and by the way, my bias is, Brad, I've never met Winston Calvert. I don't know Winston Calvert. I don't have any real bias here. But the fact is, he worked in the Slay administration. So you think there was a lot of, let's say, seasoned white guys there. He worked in the Sam Page administration, where you have a lot of, ooh, I'm a boss girl. Oh, do you like Winston? I like Winston. You don't like Winston? Oh, no. Well, then I guess we don't like Winston. The heck with Winston. There's a whole lot of gossipy stuff going on in county government. Winston has endured all this. He's thrived. He's come out in a great position. He's uniquely positioned to get in front of angry students at Brown School of Social Work who are going to change the world and fight the patriarchy, and handle them diplomatically and handle them with class, Brad. And I think he's uniquely positioned to do that.
Nimrod is a biblical figure mentioned in the book of Genesis and books of Chronicles. The son of Cush and therefore the great-grandson of Noah, Nimrod was described as a king in the land of Shinar. The Bible states that he was, quote, a mighty hunter before the Lord began to be mighty in the earth. Some later non-biblical traditions interpreting the story of Jacob's dream in the Bible, Genesis 28:11-19, identified Nimrod as the ruler who had commissioned the construction of the Tower of Babel, or of Jacob's ladder, and the identification led to his reputation as a king who had been rebellious against God. So that's
wow, we're climbing Jacob's ladder, aren't we? Right. I mean, I don't mean in a Josh Hawley kind of way, but we're climbing Jacob's ladder, not Josh's ladder.
Okay, number 2.
Up a notch to number 2.
More staffing news. That's the theme of the day. This story is also brought to us by Joe Holloman of the Post-Dispatch. Good news for an outgoing Cori Bush aide. There's a woman named Danielle Spradley. She has quite a following on Twitter, by the way, Brad. She's actually a really good follow on Twitter. That probably sounded condescending when I said actually. She's a really good follow on Twitter. And she's a longtime aide to outgoing Congresswoman Cori Bush. She has landed a brand new gig in the administration of County Executive Sam Page, St. Louis County Executive Sam Page. She is going to be working as what's technically known as a community outreach liaison. She will earn $85,000 a year, and she will focus on North St. Louis municipalities, relationships between Sam Page and North St. Louis County municipalities. Now, Brad, we know that Sam Page is up for re-election in 2026. So it's a great move by the Page team, the Page campaign team, to give a government job to this woman so she can spend the next 2 years. The primary would be in August of 2026. But the Page campaign team can have this woman up there in North County working with local leaders, paid a full-time salary to essentially do campaigning for Sam Page and put him in the best position possible for 2026.
So you're telling me again that Sam Page is hiring people to essentially benefit him personally? I mean, that never happens, does it?
I don't think that. Well, now here's the thing, and let's be fair here, Brad. This woman has a wealth of knowledge. If she's worked for Cori Bush, she knows these community groups very well. She's spent a lot of time in North St. Louis County. There's no question that working on the taxpayer dime, taxpayers would get a full-time salary from this woman. Like, this woman will work on behalf of county residents in North St. Louis County. Of course it's political, Brad. Like, if you think that this job would exist, I mean, as I read Joe Holloman's piece, this role didn't exist until now. And you know what we also never determined, Brad? You know, there was that job that Sam Page offered Gretchen Bangert if she would have just quit her St. Louis County Council race. I don't think that job was ever filed. I got that idea. I was reading there's a woman named Shannon Robinson on Twitter who's fantastic. But I think she's the one that asked that question. I don't know if the Page administration actually created that make work job for Gretchen Bangert, or if that was just kind of a carrot to dangle. Anyway, this woman will do great work on behalf of county taxpayers, I'm sure. She's going to be up there and representing Sam Page well. But of course it benefits Sam Page's reelection, especially if he's running against a powerhouse like Brian Williams from University City, an African-American gentleman who is eyeing the St. Louis County executive race. So we'll see, Brad. The point is, this is the point where Cori Bush staffers have been looking for jobs, and this is a great landing spot for this Spradley woman.
Well, I don't know if you've also heard, and this is sort of interesting as well, too, but, Bill Eigel owns a house in Wildwood, and he sort of jumps back and forth between where his residence is. And I heard that today he's going to file for county executive in St. Louis County. Have you heard?
I didn't hear that.
You didn't hear that?
Now, you know specifically where, I know exactly where he lives in Wildwood. Have you been by there before?
Yes, I know exactly where he lives.
It's right at, it's called Babbling Park. It's named after his filibusters. It used to be Babbler, but then it just became Babbling Park after Bill Eigel.
Okay, last but not least.
We love you, Bill. We love you. You know we're giving you a hard time.
Should I call him later this morning and see if he answers?
No, let's not annoy him. He sends you, I think 3 more calls this month, and that's going to violate that restraining order.
Okay, here we go.
The number one
story today is brought to us by KYRO Radio, Pro Wrestling Hall of Famer. That's a tidbit that we might get back to, Brad. Pro Wrestling Hall of Famer Mark Bland interviewed former Senator John Danforth on Mark Bland's show, which is called The Q Now. You can listen to that station, by the way. It's 105.3 FM if you're in St. Charles County, you're in the Troy area, Lake St. Louis, and it's 1280 AM as well. Mark talked with former Senator John Danforth about, really, it's kind of a relationship story, Brad, about Danforth's relationship with Josh Hawley. They were pen pals for a while. They would share notes about books. I won't give away the whole story here, Brad, but there's some elements of it that you've probably never heard from Danforth before, talking about his relationship with Josh Hawley and then also his breakup with Josh Hawley. Mark asked some really good questions about what Danforth thinks about the role of religion in modern politics. If Danforth could ask certain politicians that have passed away what they think of Donald Trump, which ones would have the most strong opinions. And also, Danforth talked a little bit about his the tomato can that he's got running for U.S. Senate, the guy named Jared Young, and talked about how, your vote for an independent candidate might not make a big difference in an election, but it will be making a statement that you don't support either Kamala Harris, that party, and you don't support the MAGA party of Trump, but you're supporting something better, like a better party. So I have a link up to the Apple Podcast today with timestamps so you can hear what Danforth had to say. And I would suggest, too, as a final note, John Danforth is, he's an older guy, Brad. He's probably about your age. So as a professional tip here, when you go to Apple Podcasts, set the speed at 1.25 or 1.5. Mark will sound perfect. I listened to it yesterday in the car with Mark at 1.25. Danforth sounds like he is stuck in molasses or some form of 1960s quicksand from some scary movie. So listen to it at 1.25 and you can actually get through it. I listened to it again this morning when I was pulling timestamps. I listened to it at regular speed and it's agonizing. It's like you're at, Del Mar Gardens and you're forced to perform some sort of a school thing and talk to old people and you just can't draw the words out of them. So listen to it at 1.25 speed.
What's the name of the guy that did the interview?
Mark Bland. And he's a retired professional wrestler, Brad. And in 2025, he is going to be inducted into the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, the version that's here in the state of Missouri, in St. Louis. Yeah, he's worked with a number of folks whose names you will recognize, Brad, like guys like Randy Orton. He trained with Randy Orton. He came up with Trevor Murdoch, legendary figures in the St. Louis and Missouri wrestling community. And Mark has had a number of on-screen roles with various wrestling promotions. He's just a fascinating guy. The pride of McClure North High School.
So what's he doing? What's he doing up in Troy? He's working up there in Troy?
No, he lives in, I don't know if he advertises where he lives, but he doesn't live in Troy. But, the Viper moved their stations. Their rock stations are still on Lake St. Louis Boulevard. Yeah. And so that's where the Viper is. And then the KYRO, I believe, actually moved their studios out of that office and moved them up to Troy.
Well, they were.
And Mark does his show, by the way, if you want to listen. It's Thursdays at 7 p.m. You can also listen to the podcast. Look up the Q Now, the letter Q, the Q Now, and you can download his podcast.
Well, they were in Troy, and then they moved down to Lake St. Louis, like you said, in the same studios as the Viper. So you say they moved back up into Troy?
I believe they have moved the talk radio piece, which would be KYRO. I believe they moved back up to Troy. I believe they have a new studio there. So I stopped by the Viper offices 2 weeks ago, Brad, and the Rock office is still in Lake St. Louis, and the AM station part is now empty. It's gone.
John, why would you do that? Why would you stop by the Viper?
Well, they have a fantastic show called Rock Back with Mac, which is on that's a Drive Rock Hour, which is from 2 to 6 p.m. You can listen to Mac spin your favorite tunes. She's fantastic. You can follow her on Instagram at Mac on the Mic. That's MAK on the mic, MIC, Mac on the Mic. Brad, they had a Bluebell ice cream promotion that I happened to win. So I swung by the offices and picked up my prize.
John, there's two great broadcasters there. John Shepper is the guy at KYRO, and then there's Chris Blevins at the Viper. I mean, when you talk about outstanding, reputable, above-board broadcasters, you can't find anybody better than Chris Blevins and John Shepper. I mean, they are like the Nimrods of the broadcasting industry.
Now, Brad, because I've known you for quite a while now, I get a sense of sarcasm emanating from you.
What? What are you saying, John? How can that be?
Listen, their station is awesome. They're a preset of mine. Mac's social media is fantastic. Her show is awesome. And, and let's get back to Mark Bland. Mark runs a fantastic show. He's left of center, but his show's fantastic. Him and his co-host, which is Jason Cull. So big shout out to Mark Bland. Folks should go listen to the podcast at 1.25 speed.
So now, see, here is where it shows how I am a really different kind of broadcaster, because normally in our radio business, a guy who comes on the station and promotes other radio stations that are not owned by this particular owner would be shunned. But in this case, John, you can mention any radio station you want. Matter of fact,
that is part. You are magnanimous about it, and you always have been, Brad. And also, if you go to the Viper website, for folks who are interested in careers in radio, they're hiring account executives and sales managers, Brad.
Who isn't?
I guess so. So.
If Shelly's listening right now, as you're talking about the Viper, she's sticking her finger down her throat trying to regurgitate, but that's a whole other story.
Oh, wow.
Okay. We have to take a break.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?